You're watching Capital City Sunday.
The presidential race is heading into the home stretch, and this is when campaign strategies become more critical.
You can see differences in the approaches by Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. Both have been on the campaign trail, but Trump has held more public events than Harris between August 23rd, the day after the Democratic convention, and October 9th. Trump held 39 public events, while Harris had 28. That's according to the tracking website Vote Hub.
But Harris recently ramped up her media blitz, appearing on 60 Minutes, The View, Howard Stern's radio show, and The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. She's also done podcasts, one with Call Her Daddy and another with Anderson Cooper. I'm here now with Kathleen Bartzen Culver, the director of UW-Madison School of Journalism and Mass Communication. Thank you for joining me.
Happy to be with you.
So both Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump have increasingly turned to non-traditional media for interviews this election cycle, joining podcasts, late night shows, radio shows more frequently than sitting for network TV interviews. How is this a shift in political messaging compared to previous campaigns?
I think this is a shift that actually began when President Barack Obama was in office and actually running for office. So it was a recognition that traditional news media have an audience, but there's audience beyond those media, and campaigns will do what they can to reach them.
When they go on these more non-traditional venues for these interviews, are the candidates reaching different voters than they would if they were to sit for, say, an interview with CNN or ABC?
I think they definitely are. If you're talking about the Call Her Daddy podcast, for instance, that Vice President Harris went on, that is a completely different demographic than you are going to get for 60 Minutes or the CBS Evening News or even the morning shows. These are people who are largely disconnected from cable and traditional outlets like that. So you're reaching a truly different audience.
You mentioned, the demographics of the Call Her Daddy podcast. I know some of Vice President Harris in particular, her other media events through this blitz she's in right now have been targeted at, middle-aged women or older voters. I want to talk about young men. That's a demographic we've seen a political split in recently between young men and young women, which parties they're favoring more. What has former President Donald Trump been doing to tap into that demographic?
To tap into the demographic of young men, he's also using the podcast and YouTube approach, trying to reach those people. Interesting announcement this morning from Vice President Harris's campaign that in the next couple of days or next week, she's going to be in Detroit to appear with Charlemagne the God. And that seems to me to be a pivot toward younger male voters.
Now, we've talked about how this is different than what candidates in the past have been doing, but, this has been happening for several election cycles in a row. Are there drawbacks to candidates opting for interviews focused more narrowly on certain groups of voters rather than network news, which does have a broader, more national reach?
It has a broader, more national reach, but it is missing some sorts of people. So, I, with all respect for the work that you do and the work that the ABC Nightly News does, these candidates have to reach voters where they are, and not all of them are in that national news audience. That said, I still think it's important for candidates to open themselves up for the kind of difficult questioning that a news outlet will give them rather than a favorable podcast or a late night TV host, which is why it was disappointing that former President Trump didn't sit for a 60 Minutes interview. I think it's important, especially in the local news context, for these candidates to be sitting down for interviews. Because you're seeing more of that with the vice presidential candidates than you are with the presidential candidates.
All right, Kathleen Bartzen Culver, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely.